Presentation. The history of the town of Silos is so closely linked to the presence of the Benedictine monastery of Santo Domingo that it is practically impossible to talk about one without considering the other. But before we begin to talk about the main events that have marked the history of the monastery and the town, we must point out that the presence of man in these lands goes back to the very beginnings of humanity. This is clearly shown by the caves in the Peñas de Cervera and by the numerous fossil remains that have been discovered at locations near Silos, such as Aedo and La Revilla. These can be admired at the Dinosaur Museum in nearby Salas de los Infantes. The Roman civilization also left its mark on Silos. There were several Roman settlements in the valley of the river Ura in the group of towns known as Tablatiello Antiquo, all of which were linked by the old road between Clunia and La Rioja. On the 3rd of June 954, Count Fernán González began the restoration of the old monastery of San Sebastián de Silos. Monastic life came into being in the area, and it developed alongside the Castilian reconquest of those territories that had been dominated by the Islamic armies. But this situation of war and conflict was precisely what brought about the material and spiritual deterioration of the monastery over the period from the 9th century to the first few decades of the 11th century. The two hamlets situated near the monastery, San Justo de Silos and Santiago de Silos, suffered the same fate. Santiago de Silos had been populated by peoples from Cantabria and the Basque areas to the north. But the course of history, both monastic and civil, was to change dramatically with the arrival in Castilian soil of Domingo Manso, a monk from San Millán de la Cogolla. Domingo was a victim of the covetousness of Don Garcia, the king of Navarra, and as a result asked the Castilian monarch, Fernando I, for the right to settle as a hermit in some remote part of his kingdom. This was in the year 1041, and the monastery of Silos was going through one of its most critical periods. Berceo, the minstrel of the saint, testifies to this in the following simple verse.
En tierra de Carazo, si oyestes contar, una cabeza alta, famado castellar, había un monasterio que fue rico lugar, mas era tan caído que se quería hermar.
The Castilian monarch entrusted the Silos abbot with the task of undertaking prodigious reforms, and they began this way. Santo Domingo built the church, the chapter house, and especially the cloister. The abbot also regenerated monastic life by following the dictates of Benedictine rule. None of this was ignored by the Christians of the peninsula. Domingo aroused the devotion of the faithful, and after his death in 1073, the miracles he was reported to have performed and the great holiness attributed to his spirit led to his canonization and to his tomb becoming a major centre of pilgrimage. All of this, of course, had an impact on the life of the young hamlet of Santo Domingo de Silos. which was born at the wish of King Alfonso VI, who in the year 1096 authorised the abbot of Silos to bring people to the area round the monastery. This is how the golden age of the town began. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the town had a population comprising Castilians, Franks, Navarrans, Moors and Jews. Economically, Silos demonstrated its dynamic vocation for craftwork and trade, plus of course the typical activities of a rural town. The decline of the monastery during the Low Middle Ages obviously affected the existence of the town of Silos, and in the early 14th century its population began a period of gradual decline. 1445 was to be a key date in the history of Silos. The Benedictine Abbey decided to transfer jurisdiction over the town to the powerful House of Velasco of Burgos. In return, it received an annual income of 26,000 maravedí coins. In 1512, the monastery of Silos joined the Benedictine congregation of Valladolid. It thus entered a period of modernization which culminated in the 18th century with the construction of the neoclassical church, a work of Ventura Rodriguez. The disentailment decree promulgated by Mendizábal in 1835 had a significant effect on the Benedictines and Franciscans of Silos, and on civil society too. The very close links between the two were felt with great intensity the day on which the Benedictine community abandoned Silos. Without the monks, the town became just like all the other neighbouring towns, austere little country backwaters where life was tough. The second monastic renovation began in 1880 when a group of French Benedictines from Ligugé Abbey, and led by the tireless Dom Guépin, settled in Silos and initiated both the material restoration of the monastery and its cultural and religious revitalization. The arrival of these monks guaranteed the future prosperity of the village of Silos. Indeed, Silos, having suffered the consequences of the rural exodus that occurred in the 1960s and 70s, now has a population of about 350. And their progress and well-being is based on the significant number of tourists who are attracted to the town for its art and the spirituality of its abbey. Visitors also enjoy the beauty of the surrounding countryside, the local gastronomy and the town's traditions.